I felt humiliated this moment that email blast called me disruptive. Karen strutted at the podium waving slides of fake violations. But her quorum was a ghost, and my stack of receipts was waiting in the dark. It didn't even start with the fines. The heat still clung to the street that evening, the kind that makes the asphalt glisten even as the sun dips. I turned the wheel of my old Chevy into the drive and killed the engine, enjoying the quiet click of metal cooling down. The smell of barbecue drifted lazily from 2 doors over charcoal and sweet sauce, mixing with the faint resin of pine needles that always seemed to settle on my garage roof. For a moment, it was the kind of suburban stillness I'd grown to cherish since retiring from civil engineering. That stillness broke the instant I noticed the paper taped to my garage door. The edges fluttered in the breeze like a warning flag. In block letters across the top, "Notice of violation. Non-compliant exterior paint." The wording felt sterile, but the placement right at eye level on my own property cut deep. I ran my fingers over the tape, rough and sticky. The ink bled slightly where sweat from someone's hand had smudged it. "Not again," I muttered. My mother, Irene, opened the screen door, her cardigan sleeves rolled up despite the heat. At 82, she still had that piercing way of seeing things, like she could measure the distance from my face to my frustration. "What's she come up with this time?" "Apparently," I said, tearing the paper free, "our garage doesn't match the approved shade." She gave a humorless chuckle. "Just like my sunflowers. Remember $500 for daring to plant something cheerful." I did remember. Her sunflowers had leaned proudly against the fence 2 summers ago, only to be labeled out of pallet by Karen, our HOA president. That fine still stung not just in the wallet but in the way it dismissed my mother's small joy. Tonight's notice carried the same blade slipped under my ribs in the guise of community rules. Across the street, Karen herself paced slowly with that pink blazer she favored, clipboard in hand. The last rays of sun caught its metal clip a glint sharp enough to remind me of a prosecutor raising evidence. She scribbled something, pretending not to look our way. I knew better. I folded the notice sharper than necessary, the paper creasing against my thumb. My bench on the porch caught the fading light, its varnish glowing amber. My father had built that bench long before Karen ever stepped into this neighborhood, long before bylaws and pallets and compliance officers. I'd sanded it smooth, kept it steady. It stood as proof of something steady in me, too. I walked into the garage, the air cooler tinged with motor oil and sawdust. The violation letter trembled in my grip. For a second, I considered pinning it to the corkboard with all the other small annoyances of HOA life. Instead, anger guided my hands. I ripped it straight down the middle, the sound sharp louder than I expected, echoing off the concrete walls. I stuffed the torn halves under a toolbox. The metal clanged when I pushed it back, a note of finality that should have comforted me. When I looked up, Karen was across the street, lips curved into a half smile. She had seen me tear it, I was sure. To her, it wasn't defeat. It was data, another entry on her clipboard. "Elliot," my mother called softly. "Don't let her see she's got to you. Too late." Karen scribbled a few more strokes, then lifted her phone with deliberate slowness. The shutter clicked once, then again my driveway, my car, maybe even the bench. Whatever angles she thought would build her story. A neighbor walked by, and Karen leaned in, whispering, her eyes still fixed on my house. I stayed in the garage doorway, the weight of torn paper still in my palm. The smell of barbecue carried on the breeze, but it no longer felt like comfort. It smelled, instead of intrusion, of eyes watching, of quiet evenings that weren't mine anymore. My bench glowed on the porch, whole and steady for now. The email arrived before sunrise, subject line screaming in bold, community reminder, "Disruptive residents." My name wasn't typed out, but the wording left little doubt. Certain individuals have repeatedly disregarded our HOA standards, causing disharmony among neighbors. That vague accusation stung worse than a direct insult. It was Karen's specialty branding, without naming, ensuring everyone knew while she never risked libel. I read it 3 times at the kitchen table, weak light from the lamp turning the words a dull yellow. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, but I didn't notice until my mother touched my shoulder. She skimmed the message, lips pressed thin. "She's escalating," was all she said. By evening, I found myself under the buzzing lights of the Lakewood Community Hall, rows of plastic chairs lined like soldiers. The room smelled faintly of burnt coffee poured into styrofoam cups. I recognized nearly everyone, the retired postman, the young couple from the corner house mothers juggling restless kids. All carried that wary politeness as if stepping into church. Karen stood at the front like she owned the place. Pink blazer again, clipboard at her side this time, backed by a projector humming like a wasp. A large screen glowed behind her, the first slide already displaying grainy photos, lawns, driveways, fences. My driveway, my garage door, my car parked slightly over the line. She tapped her pen against the lectern. "These repeated infractions undermine the harmony of Silver Hollow Estates," she said. Her voice struck like a gavel, measured and loud enough to drown whispers. I felt heat crawl up my neck as she clicked through slides, each image framed like evidence in a trial. My mother's sunflowers made an appearance archived from years before the caption reading, "Unauthorized planting, resolved fine." I wanted to protest to point out how ancient and petty that was, but my throat closed. When my turn finally came, I walked to the microphone, palms damp. "Excuse me," I began. "I'd like to clarify." The mic fizzled my voice, cutting in and out. A technician fiddled with wires, shrugged. Karen, without missing a beat, said, "Perhaps speak louder, Elliot." The room chuckled nervously. I raised my voice, trying to steady it. "These are isolated situations. I've complied with compliance." Karen interrupted smoothly. "Is not occasional. It's consistent. And unfortunately, we have testimony suggesting otherwise." She lifted a printed page, neat paragraphs in double spacing. "Several neighbors have witnessed recurring violations, non-compliant exterior paint, unapproved guest parking, visible clutter." Gasps rose around me. I scanned the faces. Most avoided my eyes, some whispering behind hands. Mrs. Patterson bent close to her husband, shaking her head. The young couple glanced down at their laps. No one spoke on my behalf. I felt a tightening in my chest, anger at being misrepresented, helplessness at being drowned out by paper and projection. I wanted to shout that the clutter was a tool chest, that the guest was my fishing buddy, that the paint matched within a shade. But what chance did words have against testimony delivered in her courtroom voice? Karen laid the page down with theatrical care. "This pattern shows disregard for our covenants, creating disruption to community harmony." She smiled slightly, as if the phrase itself absolved her of cruelty. My knuckles whitened on the edge of the podium. I managed, "If anyone here has concerns, they could have spoken to me directly." The silence that followed was worse than laughter. Just the hum of the projector, the rustle of papers, a child coughing in the back row. Karen gave a small nod, dismissing me like a judge closing a case. I stepped down the room, tilting around me, air heavy with burnt coffee and judgment. As I made my way to the back, something caught my eye. A figure sitting calmly, arms crossed, watching not me, but Karen. It was Matt, my fishing partner. His expression was unreadable, detached, almost clinical, as if he were jotting mental notes on her performance. For the first time all evening, I felt a flicker of something other than humiliation. Not hope exactly, but curiosity. Why was he studying her instead of sharing my shame? The projector clicked to the next slide, but I kept my gaze on Matt, wondering what he knew that I didn't. The air at Councey Lake carried that crisp edge of early autumn, sharp enough to sting the lungs, but pleasant after a long walk. Red leaves floated down onto the path, children's bicycles rattled past with squeaky chains, and somewhere behind me a church bell gave a single mellow strike. I sat near the water's edge, trying to shake the residue of humiliation from last spring's meeting. The surface of the lake was glassy except where ducks left ripples in crooked trails. That was when I saw him, Howard. A man I'd noticed in passing before retired lawyer folks whispered, though he looked more like a grandfather who belonged in a rocking chair. He stood near the dock, scattering crumbs from a paper bag, his corduroy jacket collar flipped against the wind. A leather satchel rested at his feet, fat with books. "Afternoon," he called, his voice carrying easily across the quiet park. I nodded, joining him at the railing. The ducks surged closer, quacking greedily. "You're feeding an army," I said. He grinned, eyes twinkling. "Better audience than a courtroom. No objections." Then he leaned on this railing, dropping his voice. "Quorum is like oxygen, you never notice until it's gone." The odd remark caught me off guard. "Excuse me," Howard tapped the satchel with his shoe. "Your HOA runs on bylaws. Section after section. But they forget the lifeblood quorum. You can't pass motions or find folks without it. You'd be surprised how often boards fudge the numbers." Something in the calm certainty of his tone unsettled me. I admitted, "They've been targeting me. My mother. Anyone who doesn't fit Karen's idea of harmony." He nodded, as if he'd expected that answer. Typical. Power unchecked rots quick. Reminds me of a case in Arvada board, fined a family for hanging wind chimes. Problem was they hadn't reached quorum for months. Every fine dissolved when someone finally challenged it. I found myself leaning closer. "So, you're saying I'm saying keep records?" Howard interrupted gently. He opened his bag, pulled out a worn copy of a charter margins filled with his penciled notes. "Track attendance at meetings. Save emails. Photograph notices. Paper doesn't lie. One day, you'll need it." Behind us, a gust rattled dry leaves against the bench. I felt something shift inside me, not relief exactly, but a spark, a sense I might not be entirely powerless. Matt appeared then, hands in pockets, quiet as usual. He nodded politely to Howard, but said, little eyes scanning the lake like he was measuring something invisible. His silence, paired with Howard's calm confidence, steadied me in a way I hadn't expected. I spent that week copying emails into folders, photographing every notice I received. The whir of my old scanner became part of the household soundscape, as common as the kettle whistling for tea. Each artifact felt like a small stone in a wall I was quietly building. One evening, as Howard and I sat on the lakeside bench, he studied me with lawyer's eyes. "Karen won't stop at notices. She'll strike at what you cherish most. Count on it." The words chilled me more than the October wind. I pictured my porch and the wooden bench my father built with his own hands. A few days later, the prediction landed in my mailbox, a thick envelope certified with that ugly green sticker slapped across the front. My hands trembled as I signed for it. Inside, a letter printed in precise language, "Notice of violation. Unauthorized structure, front porch bench." The words blurred for a moment as I stared. Howard had been right. Karen had finally reached for the heart. The Carmody Community Center smelled faintly of powdered donuts and stale coffee when I walked in. Folding chairs screeched against the linoleum as neighbors settled in the sound sharp enough to set my teeth on edge. A projector whirred at the front, already splashing pale light across a blank screen. I felt my pulse tick faster. Karen stood ready, blazer-pressed hair immaculate. She tapped her clipboard, cleared her throat, and the hum of chatter died. The first slide appeared bold letters across the top, pattern of non-compliance. She let the words hang in the room before turning, eyes locking on me. "We must set an example," she said. The next slides came in quick succession: my garage door, my lawn, even the porch where the wooden bench sat. Blown up 10 feet wide, each flaw became grotesque. Paint chips looked like rot. A toolbox by the driveway resembled junkyard clutter. When the bench appeared, the photo angled just right to make it look crooked, almost menacing, as though a handmade seat could threaten the neighborhood. I gripped the arms of my chair, fighting the urge to stand. The crowd shifted uneasily. Murmurs passed from row to row. Some glanced at me with pity, others with annoyance, as if my very presence invited scrutiny on them too. When my turn finally came, I rose, voice quivering but firm. "This is my property. That bench has been there for decades. My father built it." The microphone popped, then went dead. I tapped it, waited for a technician who never came. Karen's voice filled the void, smooth and commanding. "We've heard enough, thank you." The crowd murmured again, but this time it sounded like agreement. Mrs. Patterson pursed her lips. Jake from the corner house looked down at his shoes. Not one voice rose in my defense. Karen clicked to another slide. "The board proposes escalating fines for continued disregard of our bylaws." She lifted her hand like a conductor. "All in favor?" Hands went up across the room, quick as a tide turning. The vote carried easily. The gavel she used to close the session wasn't necessary, but she struck it anyway, wooden crack echoing like a verdict. I left without speaking to anyone. Matt was there, sitting near the back, silent as always, gaze fixed not on me but on Karen, as though cataloging her every move. It unsettled me, but I didn't have the energy to question it. That night, the neighborhood was quiet, street lamps casting long yellow pools across the asphalt. I walked up the steps to my porch and froze. The bench. Its surface bore fresh scratches gouged into the varnish. Splinters caught the moonlight like tiny shards of bone. I ran my hand over the damage. The wood bit back rough edges, breaking skin on my palm. The smell of cut fibers rose raw and bitter. I sat down heavily, ignoring the sting. My father's bench, his gift, his craft had always been steady, intact. Now it bore scars, deliberate and cruel. Karen's warning from the slideshow echoed, "We must set an example." She had found the way to strike at more than money, more than paint or parking. She had struck at memory. Neighbors' windows glowed faintly across the street, curtains drawn. I was alone with the silence, the splinter digging into my thumb, and the realization that my father's work had become her battlefield. The projector's hum still lingered in my ears, joined by the click of that dead microphone. Their sounds fused into a single message. I was outnumbered. But as I traced the scar on the bench, I felt something deeper stir, a grief lined with stubbornness. The envelope was thick, stamped with the HOA's seal in blue ink, and the words "Final Notice" glaring in red across the top. I stood on the porch, staring at it while the winter air nipped at my fingers. My heart thudded like I'd already lost something precious. Inside the letter was blunt foreclosure proceedings would begin if outstanding fines weren't paid within 30 days. I set it on the kitchen table. My mother pressed her hand to her mouth but didn't speak. The quiet was worse than anger. Later that evening, Matt stopped by. He skimmed the letter, lips tightening. Funny, he said almost to himself, how their books never add up. His eyes lingered on the HOA's financial tables. Then he looked at me. "Bring what you've got. Time to test the waters." The next week, I walked into the HOA boardroom clutching a folder. The fluorescent lights buzzed unforgiving. Rows of folding chairs held neighbors half listening, their phones glowing faintly in their laps. Karen stood at the front, posture regal, lips already curved as though she'd won. When my turn came, I spread out my papers, printed emails from past years, minutes copied from newsletters, budget notes that contradicted each other. My voice wavered, but I forced it steady. "The association has charged for landscaping improvements that never happened. The same line item appears in 3 consecutive budgets." "Where did the money go?" Karen stepped closer to the microphone. "Mr. Granger, your role here is to comply, not to question." Her tone carried both reprimand and amusement. I raised another page. "And quorum. These meetings last fall attendance never met the requirement." "Every fine." Since then, the microphone clicked off. The sound cut left me speaking into silence. People shifted in their seats, a cough echoing from the back. My words felt thin against the fluorescent hum. "Technical issue," Karen said smoothly, reclaiming the floor. "Let's not waste time." She clicked the projector. Grainy images of my garage filled the wall again, washing me in pale light. I tried anyway, louder this time without the mic. "You're violating your own bylaws. Quorum isn't optional." Security at the side door stirred. A board member leaned to whisper, then gestured toward me, motioning them closer. The neighbors avoided my eyes, retreating into their phones. Not one stood up. Not one voice joined mine. My throat tightened. I could feel the pressure of 30 pairs of eyes watching me sink alone. I gathered my papers, sliding them back into the folder, each sheet trembling under my hands. Karen's smile widened slow and victorious, like she'd scripted the whole scene. Meeting adjourned, she declared, gavel striking. That night, I drove home under a pale moon, the hum of the boardroom still echoing in my ears. A package waited on my porch, certified mail. Green sticker glaring. I carried it inside, already knowing. Inside, another notice, lien proceedings pending. Failure to remit fines will result in encumbrance of property. The words blurred. My house, my last anchor, was now her target. The lien letter lay on my workbench like a bad X-ray. Everything wrong lit up in cloudy white. I sat on the stool in my garage, elbows on my knees, staring past the cracked bench on the porch that I could see through the open door. The split in its varnish looked wider this morning, as if the wood itself had been worrying all night. I thumbed the crease of the letter. Lien proceedings pending. The language was so calm, it felt cruel. Matt stood beside the pegboard, reading without a word. He had a way of going still that made the air around him go quiet too. "Paper trails don't lie," he said finally, eyes still on the letter. "If you dare to use them." I let the sentence hang between us like a bridge I wasn't sure would hold. The thought of marching my stack of printouts into a building with marble counters and people who spoke in numbers well, it made my palms slick. But the bench on the porch was still broken, and my name was on a threat I didn't deserve. I put the letter back in its envelope, smoothed it as if that could smooth my life, and said, "Let's go." Jefferson County Clerk's office had that official chill I remembered from engineering plan rooms, light bouncing off stone, the low murmur of people waiting to be told where to stand. A numbered dispenser clicked. A monitor on the wall advanced digits in patient increments. The air smelled faintly of ink and paper dust, a scent I associated with blueprints and deadlines. Today, it smelled like risk. At the counter, the clerk wore a neutral expression people perfect after decades of public service. Her name tag read Alma in tiny caps. I slid the forms across my injunction, my chronology, the printouts I'd labeled by month and meeting. My hands shook just enough that the top page misaligned and I forced myself to breathe before straightening it. I'm filing an injunction against the Silver Hollow Estates Homeowners Association, I said, then cleared my throat. On the basis of improper procedure, specifically lack of quorum. Alma adjusted her glasses and paged through calmly. She didn't ask why my voice sounded like I'd swallowed gravel. She didn't look at me like a problem or a nuisance. She just read, turned a page, read some more. You brought supporting minutes? She asked. Yeah. I tapped the packet, aware of how damp my fingerprints had become. Attendance tallies budget lines the email where they canceled a meeting and still reported a vote. I highlighted. She nodded, slid the packet under a glass pane, and reached for a stamp. You'll want this recorded. Her hand pressed down. The stamp hit with a heavy thunk, a sound that landed in my chest like an anchor. She lifted the page and I saw the seal raised circular, the date embedded in the paper like a bronze coin under skin. I hadn't realized how tight I was wound until then. Something loosened. Fear, yes, but a thread of something brighter too. A first inhale after holding my breath. Alma handed me the receipt. Keep this copy. If you need to serve notice, instructions are here. She put a finger on a paragraph and looked at me just for a moment like a person and not a form. Make sure you also post in a place where residents will see. Outside, the winter sun made everything look smaller. Matt walked beside me, hands in his coat pockets, gaze on the courthouse steps as if counting them. You did the right thing, he said. I feel like I jumped off a roof and only now remembered I'm supposed to land. You brought a parachute, he said, nodding toward the stamped packet. Most folks don't. We drove back to the neighborhood in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable. At the entrance, the gate made its familiar beep and swallowed us like a patient mouth. The community board stood next to the mail kiosks, cork faded from too many thumbtacks littered with flyers about dog waste and block party dates. I pinned my public notice dead center, the paper crisp against the cork. The thumbtack went in with a small squeaking protest. A pair of neighbors hovered near the recycling bin. One pretended to read a flyer about swim lessons. The other pretended not to notice me. When the tack seated, both of them glanced over. Their eyes moved the way people's do when they're trying to calculate if trouble is contagious. What is it, one asked, because curiosity was stronger than self-preservation for a moment. An injunction, I said. Meeting minutes say the board hasn't had quorum. Fines issued without quorum aren't valid. I kept my voice even, like I was explaining load-bearing walls. It helped. They traded glances. I thought they could do whatever the other said. They can't. I answered more firmly than I felt, not on paper. By the time we reached my street, the afternoon had rounded its shoulders. Karen's SUV sat in her driveway like a satisfied cat. I could see her blinds twitch just slightly. I set the stamped copy on my kitchen table and felt that strange lightness again, a weight shifting from my shoulders into the pages where it belonged. The next HOA meeting, the boardroom was colder than usual, or maybe that was just me. Matt took a seat along the back wall, as unobtrusive as a shadow. I stood near the aisle with my copy of the injunction visible in a clear sleeve. When Karen spotted it, the corner of her mouth twitched upward in a smile that never reached her eyes. He thinks paperwork saves him, she said to no one, and everyone voice pitched so it would carry. Then louder, into the microphone, we've received a notice from Mr. Granger. The board disputes his claims and will respond appropriately. A few heads turned toward me. I didn't expect applause, but I also didn't expect the small pulse of relief that came from meeting no one's gaze and still staying upright. The projector flickered. A neighbor coughed, the sound echoing against the cheap ceiling tiles. Karen's smile widened as she moved briskly through the agenda, but the rhythm was off. She kept glancing toward the clear sleeve like it might hiss. When the meeting ended, she waited until most people had shuffled out. I was packing up my folder when her heels clicked toward me. Up close, her perfume smelled like grapefruit and something metallic. Public postings, she said friendly on the surface, can be confusing to residents. They can also be clarifying. I said, surprised my voice didn't shake. She tilted her head. You're making quite a show. I'm following the bylaws. I let the words settle, simple as gravity. For a heartbeat, her eyes hardened. Then the smile returned, polished back into place. She pivoted to the dais and tapped the microphone. Before we adjourned, she announced a quick administrative note. The room, half empty, paused. Given recent misinformation, the board will hold an emergency community meeting to address false accusations and restore order. She paused just long enough to let restore order do its work. Notices will be sent. A murmuring ripple rolled across the remaining chairs. I felt the familiar squeeze of anxiety, but under its steady surprising was that same lightness. The seal's impression in my document pressed through 2 pages. When I touched it, the paper remembered the pressure. I walked out into the cold with my folder against my ribs. The night air smelled faintly of snow and distant chimneys. Behind me, the boardroom door clicked shut. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and then thought better of it. I looked toward my porch. The bench waited cracked patient. For the first time since it splintered, I believed it might hold my weight again. The knock came just after sunrise, steady and deliberate. I opened the door to find Howard standing there, shoulders hunched in his old wool coat pipe clenched between his teeth, though it wasn't lit. Under one arm, he carried a worn leather folder that looked as though it had survived 3 decades of trials. The corners were softened edges frayed, and it smelled faintly of dust and tobacco. He didn't waste words. "She's lost her quorum months ago," he muttered as he stepped inside. I gestured toward the kitchen table where my papers were already spread, notices stamped in red envelopes with green certified mail stickers, my own notes scrawled on yellow pads. Howard set his folder down with a heavy thump. He flipped it open and pulled a stack of state statutes, highlighted lines bright against faded paper. "Quorum is not a courtesy," he said. "It's oxygen. Without it, nothing she passed holds weight." The words sank into me like a lungful of clean air. Matt sat at the end of the table, silent as usual, watching the exchange. He studied Howard with quiet interest, then glanced at me and gave a short nod, the kind of affirmation I had come to rely on more than I liked to admit. Howard tapped one document with his pen-sharp beats against the paper. "You've got them. The minutes show it plain 7, required 5 present." Again and again. He pulled out another sheet. "This one they voted fines with 4. She knew it. They all knew it." His eyes narrowed, voice tightening. "If you press the house of cards, falls." That afternoon, we moved to his den. It was a room that seemed built to absorb secrets, shelves groaning under the weight of law books, lamps casting warm pools of amber light, and the faint, sweet-sour smell of pipe tobacco that lingered in the wood itself. He handed me a legal pad. "Read your case aloud," he said. I stumbled through the first sentences, my voice still carrying the tremor of someone used to being shut off by microphones. Howard stopped me with a raised hand. Short, declarative. No flourishes. Say the fact, then the violation. Think of it like hammer and nail. He tapped his pen in rhythm with my words until the cadence settled in. Back home, the bench waited like an injured friend. Its scratches still showed under the porch light, each gouge a reminder of humiliation. I fetched sandpaper, ran it across the surface in long strokes, shavings curling onto the boards. The sound was harsh at first, then soothing, steady. When the wood felt smooth under my palms, I opened a can of fresh paint. The scent filled the night air, sharp and promising. Brush in hand, I laid down even strokes, each layer covering the scars but not erasing the memory. My father's bench began to glow again, catching the lamplight in a soft sheen. While the paint dried, neighbors began drifting over in hesitant pairs. Mrs. Patterson brought me a photocopy of minutes she'd kept. She whispered, "I always thought something was wrong, but—" She let the sentence die, eyes darting toward Karen's house before she slipped away. Later, Jake from the corner house appeared, a USB stick hidden in his fist. Screenshots of emails, he murmured. Karen forgot I was CC'd. His voice trembled, but he pressed the drive into my palm as though passing contraband. Their whispers carried the same note, fear edged with hope. For the first time, I felt less alone. That night, I sat at Howard's again, the den lit by a single desk lamp. Smoke curled from his pipe, circling my notes like ghosts of old trials. I read my speech once more. My voice cracked, but steadied, each fact sharper, each violation clearer. Howard's pen kept time like a metronome. When I finished, he smiled, not warmly, but with the satisfaction of a craftsman whose apprentice had finally cut a straight line. "You'll be ready," he said simply. I went home close to midnight. The bench gleamed faintly under the porch light, paint still tacky, the smell drifting out to the street. I sat near it with my notes in hand, reading them against the quiet. The bench looked stronger, and for the first time in years, so did I. The house was silent when the mail slot scraped. An envelope slid onto the rug with a faint hiss. I picked it up, heart already climbing. The letterhead was bold, official, impossible to mistake. Emergency full community meeting. Attendance required. The words seemed to vibrate in the stillness. My hands didn't shake this time. The notice was a threat, yes, but also an invitation. The hall was already buzzing when I arrived. Folding chairs had been lined in neat rows, but the crowd overflowed into the aisle's neighbors shoulder to shoulder. The air was thick with heat tension and the faint smell of coffee brewing at the back table. Conversations overlapped in nervous hums like the ocean before a storm. I paused outside for a breath. My hand brushed across the smooth wood of the bench newly restored. Its varnish caught the morning light warm and steady. I whispered under my breath, "This one's for you, Dad," before stepping inside. Howard was already near the front legal folder at his side, pipe tucked away for propriety. He gave me a curt nod approval disguised as impatience. Matt leaned against the wall at the back as watchful as ever, eyes scanning the room. Karen stood behind the podium, clipboard in hand. But her confidence had cracks now. A sheen of sweat lined her forehead, and when she tried to call the meeting to order, her voice sounded brittle. The microphone squeaked, echoing louder than her words. When my name was called, I rose and carried a stack of papers to the podium. My legs didn't shake this time. One by one, I laid down documents, each sheet hitting the wood with a thud that carried across the hall. These, I said, are the attendance records. 7 required, 5 present. Another thud. Here, 4. Yet votes were taken. I raised my voice just enough for the back row. Every fine issued without quorum is invalid. The murmurs swelled louder, angrier. I saw heads nod, arms cross in indignation. Karen tried to interrupt, but Howard rose slowly and cleared his throat. His words were simple, firm. "He is correct. State statute makes these votes void." The pen in his hand tapped once like a gavel. Karen's knuckles whitened around her clipboard. "This is misinformation," she said, voice, straining eyes darting around for support. But the crowd no longer looked to her. Neighbors erupted, voices overlapping. "You fined me. 3 times. You lied about landscaping projects. We paid for nothing." The tide had shifted, and she was stranded. Mrs. Patterson stood and pointed directly at Karen. "Resign." The word hung in the air, picked up by another, then another. Soon it rolled like thunder. "Resign. Resign." Karen's voice faltered. She tried to raise her clipboard like a shield, but the paper trembled. For the first time, she seemed small. Howard stepped to the microphone. "Motion of no confidence has been raised. A vote is in order." His tone left no room for doubt. Hands shot up across the hall, more than enough to overwhelm the handful clinging to Karen's side. The vote passed, clean, final. Karen's title was stripped with a chorus of voices louder than any gavel. Silence followed, the heavy kind that feels like release. I turned toward the door, stepped outside, and with Matt's help carried the restored bench into the hall. Its polished wood gleamed under the fluorescent lights. We set it down at the front where everyone could see. Applause broke out, not scattered, but unanimous, rolling through the hall like a tide washing away years of fear. People stood clapping, some with tears in their eyes. Karen was still there, clutching her clipboard, forced to watch as the bench symbol of what she had tried to break stood proud again. I rested a hand on its smooth backrest. My voice was steady. This bench was built to last. So is this community. The applause swelled again, not just for me, but for what we'd reclaimed. The last gavel fell silent, and outside the hall the evening smelled of fresh coffee and cut grass. I brushed my fingers along the bench I'd restored smooth now, steady again, and felt my father's presence in its grain. Justice here wasn't a shout. It was neighbors raising hands together, rewriting the story we'd almost lost. We learned that fines fade, but community endures when folks share copies, show up, and refuse to be divided. A hall once heavy with fear now rings with ordinary laughter, the kind you only hear when a town exhales at last. Where has your neighborhood found its own breath of hope?